Very similar to our last video, we're going to real briefly just go through two quick examples of what it is like to find the circumference of a circle and just show you one problem, very much again like last time, of working backwards. Now, the circumference of a circle, I should probably make a note here as I did in one of the previous videos. One way to think about it, it's actually pi times your diameter. So if they hand you the diameter, then go ahead and just use that version instead, that's fine. But traditionally, the way I've seen it growing up is 2 pi r. And I really like 2 pi r because it reminds me a little bit of the area formula. The area formula is pi r squared, so it's kind of like they just move this 2 up to the exponent instead. So I can kind of easily remember which formula is which this way. Although they're pretty straightforward, they're pretty simple. As far as math formulas go, these are some of the smaller, simpler ones. So for this first problem, this one is just finding the circumference. So we're taking a look, circumference is 2 pi r. I'll represent that with a big C here just to be a little lazy. It's going to be 2 pi times the radius we were provided. Now our radius, again, one-dimensional, so just inches, is 3.94. And again, just rely on the calculator for things that involve pi. If they're asking you to round, this is going to be 2 decimal places since we have been given 2 decimal places. If they specify otherwise, then of course follow their lead. Do what they ask you to do. If you're working out in some kind of field doing this kind of thing, you'll know, or you'll have computers automating this process. So we had 2 pi times this. I said 2 decimal places, so the second 5 is going to bump this first 5 up to a 6. So we see 24.76. The difference with circumference problems from area problems, other than, of course, a different formula, is that you don't change dimensions. Circumference is still a basic measurement. You can think about, like, if I uncurl the circle and make it a straight line, I can just measure that with a tape measure or a ruler, depending on how big the circle is. Whereas you cannot just use a ruler to measure area or measure volume. You have to use multiple different measurements for those things. So with that long ramble, all I want to say is that circumference is one-dimensional because it's perimeter, it's just the distance. So we just need inches here. We don't need to add any kind of exponent. If that ramble aside, that problem wasn't too bad, this next one shouldn't be all that bad either. In fact, this is nicer than the area stuff. There's no exponent, so there's no square root or anything like that. So just going to rewrite real quick that the circumference is equal to 2 pi times r. And so we're going to translate that into 17.52. They provided us with the circumference this time, and they have asked us to find our radius. And you might look at this and go, okay, well, we have to divide by a couple of different things, so we get a couple steps here, but just make sure that you realize that 2 pi is really just one number. If pi is about 3.14, then 2 pi is about 6.28. You just double it. So we're going to actually just divide by all of this at one time, which actually makes this a little bit cleaner, a little nicer than the area problems working backwards. And that should make some sense because when you're working in 2 dimensions, things should be more complicated than when you're working in 1 dimension. And having said all that, let's go ahead and get this thing plugged in. We have 17.52, and we're just going to divide that by 2 pi. Now I'm putting parentheses here just because the calculator may read it wrong if you don't. If you don't like that, you know, find a way to what's the word I want to look for here? Maybe put it into a fractional form. For example, in the calculator, on this calculator anyway, I can actually write it out properly. So here we go. We can see that's the same value here. And again, 2 decimal places. The 8's going to bump the first 8, so we get 2.79. One-dimensional, because we're dealing with the radius now. And we're just going to bring those meters right down there. Now, just to verify my concerns, if I had done this instead, let's just see what would have happened. Notice that I did get a different answer this time. And I think this is a good thing to end this video on, is to illustrate this point. Your calculator is taught essentially old school order of operations. It works from left to right, and it does the whole PEMDAS, if you've heard of that, if you've heard of, like, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, or any other mnemonic to memorize these things. The calculator sees 17.52 divided by 2, and it does that first. Then it multiplies all of that by pi instead of dividing by pi. because it's seeing this, it's reading it this way instead. So I'll show it visually here, and then I'll stop rambling. So if it had been written this way, then the calculator would be correct. But the pi and the 2 are both supposed to be on the bottom of that fraction, and that's why I introduced parentheses here. So be careful working through problems like this. The biggest issues that I see tend to be calculator typing. I don't tend to see people having problems with the formulas themselves.